This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Well, good morning, Kelly.
Good morning, Ethan. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's like I'm back home.
You're back where you belong.
I'm back where I belong.
Right?
I feel like it's been a really long time since we recorded a podcast, but it really hasn't been. It's very strange.
Yeah, not too bad. I mean, we did one, a week ago?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so today I believe we're talking about bullying in schools, and more specifically, when parents should get involved in bullying situations. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. What we're really talking about is not really just bullying, but we'll address the bullying factor because that's kind of a big topic nowadays. I mean, it should be.
I mean, that's why I said it. It's going to be,
Yeah.
It's going to be eye-catching.
The real is, when should they get involved in school safety? The real question, right?
Mm.
And how do they do that? And why should they do that? That's kind of what we're going to talk about today. And, I got this question posed to me 2 weeks ago, and I wrote a quick little blog to address the question. And it involved a parent who had essentially been called to the office by the principal because her child had been a witness to an incident that involved some sort of threat of violence. And the question was, by this parent, was, when should we talk to our schools about their culture of violence and their culture of bullying within the school? And when is it just rattling the sabers and making noise and so forth? So that's what drove me to put this together. And I thought, we're in the beginning of the school year where we are looking at starting off correctly, and we're already seeing signs of bullying. We're already seeing signs of threats of violence, however that is defined by you and or your school. But now's a good time to start getting ahead of that curve for this school year. So let's talk about that, Ethan.
Let's do it.
All right.
So what the first question is, when parents should be, inquiring about the safety culture of their children in school?
Yeah.
I mean, my first reaction to that would be like the day that they're involved, like probably even before that. If you were looking at like a new school, that'd probably be a question you'd want to ask before your kid even enters the school, I would think.
Right. You want to know what the culture is. Are they
Yeah.
going to be honest with you? Who knows? But you should be
That's
asking.
That's true.
Because the more people who ask, the more it becomes top of their priority. Why are people asking this? Well, because it's a thing that we're aware of and we should be addressing it, not just when it happens, but before it happens. And when you start talking to parents, they have this reluctance to get involved. It's the school. The school will take care of it. It's the school's responsibility. It's somewhere else. It's not in my home. It's somewhere else. So when do I get involved? Well, the fact of the matter is it is your child or children, if you have multiple kids, that are involved in this school. And if they're involved in an incident, then you have every right to inquire about why this is occurring. not just that it occurred, but why is it occurring? And when you're talking to principals and so forth, we often look at handling just this incident. But if you go back to our blog last year about bullying and communicating with parents, we're really talking about this cycle of bullying or this cycle of violence. And if we're already seeing incidences, and it doesn't surprise me at all, of bullying, then we need to nip that in the bud very, very quickly. Because we look at bullying as this position of power. It comes from this position of power. I'm bigger than you. I'm stronger than you. I'm more popular than you. I am smarter than you. All of these, I am more than you, and I'm going to show you. This is really a natural phenomena in the natural world, right? Survival of the fittest.
Yep.
Right. Strong preying upon the weak. And this is how this all plays out. And it plays out in schools every day, even at the earliest ages, where kids are posturing based upon their strength, their abilities, their level of intelligence, and so forth. But it's the way that we use that becomes concerning to us in the safety environment. They use it to gain an advantage or to make themselves look bigger, better, faster, stronger by attacking the weak and getting that psychological advantage or a physical advantage by being more powerful. And it's one of those things that we have to acknowledge and we have to address. And we can no longer, we've said this several times and we'll keep on saying it, we can no longer look at schoolyard incidences solely as schoolyard incidences. We have to look at where or if they fall upon the cycle, where within that cycle do they fall upon. And we have to stop it. We have to address the behaviors. We have to give the bully the tools and the motivation to stop bullying. And we have to get the kid who is being bullied, we have to give them the tools and the motivation to stop being a victim, right? Because that's what this is. Predator, victim, predator, prey, victimizer, victim, right? So we need to really stop that cycle. And if we're going to stop that cycle, we need our parents to be involved. And if our parents are recognizing there's a culture of violence or a culture of bullying, then we need to address that and reconfigure our culture to where it's supportive, where we can show how smart we are, where we can show how athletic we are, we can show how powerful we are without doing it at the expense of somebody else and without trying to humiliate somebody, which is often a component of bullying. We've talked about this incident a few times, the first grader and the fourth grader.
Yep.
Right. And that case, for those who aren't familiar with that, is I had a principal come to me when I was a safety coordinator asking me how to handle this situation. She had a parent of a fourth grader come into her office demanding that a first grader be removed from the school and essentially be prosecuted for threatening to kill her fourth grader. And the principal, rightfully so, said, "Come on, this is a first grader. Really?" She goes, "Kelly, what would you do?" And I said, "I would do a threat assessment on both." And she goes, "Really? Why? We're dealing with first graders and fourth graders." And I said, "Exactly." So she gives me the circumstances. First grader and a bunch of her friends are playing kickball. Kickball ends up in the fourth grader's area, and fourth grader takes the ball and won't give it back to the first grader. The fourth grader says, I'm not giving this back to you because you keep kicking it into our area and you're bothering us. First grader asks several times. Fourth grader refuses. Finally, the first grader responds with, give it back to me or I'm going to kill you. So if you break that down, fourth grader keeping the ball because she has a position of power. First of all, she has possession of the ball. Second, she's larger, stronger, and has a bunch of her friends that are all larger and stronger there to back her up. The first grader says, yeah, I don't really play that game, so I'm going to take back the power by threatening violence to get it back. So they're both coming at it from different positions of power, but they're both within that cycle. So if you're going to really look at who the victims are and who the bullies are, and where within that cycle do you intervene, you have to look at both children, because the parent of the fourth grader is going to say, my child is the victim here. First grader threatened to kill my fourth grader. But the reality is the fourth grader was also the bully, and the first grader was also the victim of being bullied. So you have to address both behaviors if we're going to break that cycle. If we're going to allow the fourth grader to get away with her actions of bullying the first grader with the possession and the refusal to give the ball back, then she's going to learn that that's an acceptable behavior, and it's not. If you don't address the threat made by the first grader saying, oh, she's just a first grader, and you don't address that inappropriate comment in response, then she's going to believe that that's an acceptable response. And you haven't done anything. If you just say, give me the ball, here, give it back to her, you go that way, you go that way, you have not addressed the behavior. And you have to address both of those young children's behavior. Should parents come in and report that? Yes. When? As soon as they're aware of that in this instance. Now, if you have this idea that there is a culture of violence and a culture of bullying within the school culture, then you need to get a couple parents together and walk through the door and say, look, we're hearing all of this stuff going on. What are you doing about it? Are you investigating it? Are you addressing it? Are you even aware that this is going on? Because what do kids do?
They don't tell their parents, or they don't
tell their teachers.
Right.
Because they're going to be labeled a tattletale.
Right.
But they might tell their parents because something's happening, and who do you, especially young kids, who do they go to help them solve their problems? Mom, dad.
Yeah.
Right.
Ideally. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, probably as much now as ever before they're doing that, right?
Yeah.
Because they believe they can. It's not like back in the olden days when I was a kid, you used to say, I'm going to go tell my dad and he's going to come over and beat up your dad. Right.
That doesn't work like that anymore.
It doesn't work like that anymore. Especially with the amount of single parent homes. Right. But the idea that we have to ask this question, when should I, indicates that there's a gap that needs to be filled. Right. And when you should is as soon as you can, because of this whole bystander syndrome. I'm going to call it a syndrome. I'm not sure it really is. There have been many, many studies done at the federal level and looking at what responsibility the bystanders play in critical incidences. And we look at how many people are videotaping somebody getting beat up as opposed to intervening, right? So they're observing acts of violence and they're choosing not to intervene and they're choosing to record it and post it. Why? Because they get their affirmation that way. Oh,
Right.
did you see that video? Yeah, I posted it. Oh, that was a cool video.
It's all about the likes and the shares.
Yeah. And we're in a different environment, different culture now. But this was when I was researching quick, easy communications for schools during an emergency, I found this sign. And this is a real legitimate sign. It was in England, I believe. And the sign basically said, in an emergency, get to a safe place before you start recording.
I mean, it makes sense to me.
Right? But the problem is they had to say that.
That is
right?
a problem.
Because people are getting hurt.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Recording. They're not taking protective actions. And they'd rather get the video than get to a place of safety. And it really tells us where we're at, right? But that being said, we need to report, we need to get involved to prevent these things from occurring or to mitigate them from, once they've started. What can we do to help mitigate this so nobody gets hurt? Recording it isn't helping. If you're intervening and you're saying, hey, Mr. Principal, Mrs. Principal, why are we getting all of these different reports of bullying coming from your school? What about these incidences of fighting? We had 3 fights last week based upon incidents that are occurring at your school. What are we doing about that? Because it is a sign of the culture. If you have all of these incidences of violence, regardless of the level, that you need to start addressing. I remember last year having a conversation with a school district where they are having an issue with students pulling the fire alarm so that the school evacuates, so that 2 or 3 of them can engage in a fight.
Wow. Because
there's a beef between these kids. And they know that there'll be so many kids out in the evacuation area that the teachers can't control all of them.
That's pretty well thought out.
Right? So as a parent, how do you address that? Right? You can't just say, oh, that's a school issue. No, this is your kids. This is your friends' kids, right? Children, friends of your kids, right? That are coming over to your house, part of your day-to-day life. Why are we not addressing that? How are we letting that go on? So when you hear and see that kind of stuff, especially as a school administrator, you need to say, well, we've got to do something here. We've got to start addressing that. And we've got to address the culture so that these things don't escalate. Because what's happening when you have a culture that the kids pull the fire alarms so that they can fight somebody? Where do you think that's going next?
I mean, you can go a whole bunch of different directions there.
Right? Do you think that that's the first time that those 2 kids had a beef with somebody, with themselves, each other?
Oh, absolutely not.
No. Right? Yeah. So it's not the first time they met and they didn't like each other and they decide, okay, we're going to pull a fire alarm and go out and start boxing it up. That ain't where it started.
No.
And that's not where it's going to end. There was an interesting study that was done by one of our partners that looked at the location of shots being fired on a school campus. Not just the fact that they were shootings occurring, but where on school campuses. Where do you think most of the shootings occur physically on a school campus.
My first guess would be in the most populated areas. That was really general.
Right? Good way to
I'm trying to cheat a little bit.
Where there are the most people.
Probably cafeteria.
Not necessarily the case.
Or, I think you've said this before, it's like when they're first getting into school or they're out of school.
Right? Parking lots, football games, outside of football games, before they ever get into any area of security.
Okay.
Across the street from the school, on the way to school, those areas are far more likely to see shootings. So let me ask you this. If we are pulling fire alarms for the purpose of engaging in violent activities, relatively low level fights, what's the next step?
Well, I mean, if someone wanted to, do mass damage and they already know that that's a way that a first responder or teacher can't get there in time to resolve the issue before it gets worse, then, it could
we're going to
become much worse. Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to become worse, whether it's an edged weapon, a knife or a blunt weapon, a bat, a pipe, or a firearm, right?
That's actually kind of terrifying to think about.
It's going to escalate.
Wow.
And because people are never satisfied with doing the same as we did before, right? We learn and we escalate in both good and bad. So when should we intervene? The sooner the better. And when I say the sooner the better, go back to my reference for the first grader and the fourth grader. Kindergartners show violent behavior. We need to intervene. Kindergartners show the ability to work at things from a position of power. Boys versus girls. Right? Sometimes we call it teasing. Other times we call it coming from a position of power because I'm bigger, stronger, faster, smarter, whatever than you are. So when is as soon as you become aware. Why? Because you want to prevent it from escalating. Because it will. It always does. Unless there's some sort of intervention. The other reason is because if you have a culture of violence in school or a culture of bullying in school, kids can't learn at their full potential. If they're worried about even going into a bathroom because people get beat up in the bathroom or somebody's claimed this as their bathroom and they have to hold it all day, you think that kid is learning? Right?
No.
Right? So, and, ultimately, you're doing this to protect your kid, your child, because we don't know who the next victim is going to be. You have a responsibility as a parent to drive the safety of your schools for your child, your children, and other people's who haven't seen it yet. What's that saying from Spider-Man? With great power comes great responsibility.
That was my moment to shine. You took it from me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, Ethan, what's that saying in Spider-Man?
With great power comes great responsibility.
Right?
Uncle Ben.
And knowledge is power.
That's true.
If you have the knowledge that something is occurring and you have the power to intervene or make somebody else aware of it, you have a responsibility to make sure that they can. You have a responsibility. It gets back to those red flags. Oh, little Johnny, I wasn't surprised. He's been acting like this for years. Oh, really? Whose fault is that little Johnny wasn't taken aside and talked to and helped, supported with changing his behavior? If you didn't see the red flags or you saw the red flags and didn't take action, whose responsibility is it now?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it always makes me shake my head when I see stories like that.
Yeah.
Wasn't there I'm trying to think of some wasn't there some like lawsuit or something where like it was some kid that did some violent act or something, and then like the parents knew about it, and I think the parents end up getting like sued over it.
Charged criminally.
Yeah, there was some.
Yeah, Oxford, Michigan.
Oh, so you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
I don't know if that was school related or not, but
it was.
Oh, was it?
Oxford High School. Yep. Child was thought to have a weapon and was acting strange. I don't know. I don't remember all of the circumstances. It's been over a year now.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, come back now. Yeah.
And they did a threat assessment. The school basically did a threat assessment, and the school counselors called the parents in and said, hey, you need to do something with this child now, or we're going to expel them, I think was the gist of that. And the parents said, we have to go to work. We're out. And then they released the child back to the school, and he conducted a shooting, killing several people. Mom and dad then were arrested for many things, but then the school district was sued over that, and that's still going back and forth in court.
Wow.
So I don't know what the status of that is in court, but yes, you have an obligation. I haven't heard of a parent having that same issue of, unless it's your child. So we're talking about mom and dad of that child knew about it and didn't do anything. I don't want to get into the details because I'm not 100% on them, but the parents were charged, arrested, but I haven't heard of another parent knowing and not intervening being charged.
But I mean, we've seen it happen, so it can happen.
Right. So it's possible. Yep. It's possible. Do you have a legal obligation to report something that you know is potentially end up in a violent act? I'm not sure you have a legal, but you certainly have a moral obligation.
Yeah.
So I guess the next question, is how do you do that? How do you approach it?
It's like our podcast is turning into a parenting podcast real quick.
Right. Well, today is how do you approach your school?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
How does the school help the parent be part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem? If you have parents who are reluctant to report things, then they're part of the problem. If you have a culture where parents can come in and freely talk about stuff and think they're going to be supported when they come in, and they think something is going to happen, is going to be fruitful, then we should do that, right?
Oh, yeah. 100%.
So how do we help parents do that from a school perspective, right? I guess that's the next question. How do we change that culture? First of all, you can't just say that we don't allow bullying, and then you allow bullying to go on. It's always the actions that speak louder than the words. So how do we help parents? We get them involved is the answer to that safety, that whole safety culture that we're creating. Are they invited to participate in the safety planning? Do they have access to anonymous tip reporting lines where they can report stuff and then they can see the results of that? Are your administrators, teachers receptive of their concerns, where a parent can come in and talk to the teacher? And is there ways that teacher can then communicate to the administrators, hey, I got this report, just so you know, we have this and this is what we're doing? Are they communicating that? Is there this sort of 360-degree review of those reports? Is there a way for the teacher to report incidences where they can get supported? I'm having a problem with little Johnny.
So I was almost going to ask you a question, and I think you may have answered it. A question that I was going to have is, how do you decipher between, because I'm sure it would happen, reports that are real and reports that are not real. And I think just what you said, having everyone with the capability of reporting, it would give you that kind of all those different perspectives. And I think if you had all of them together, it would kind of give you a more accurate depiction of what's actually going on. Because if you're only hearing from one side, one report, you're going to get probably maybe a skewed set of data, right? But if you have everyone reporting, let's say about the same kid, and everyone's saying the same thing, then okay, it's probably true. But if it's like you have one person that says one thing, but then three other people are like, well, it's really this.
Right? Here's the way to understand that, right? Is we often want to know what the mental health status of our school is. We want to know what the culture of our school is. And if we're talking specifically about the culture of violence or the culture of threats and safety and all of those things, we have to ask the question, what do you guys think? We have to be proactive. What are you hearing? Talk to your teachers or your parents. Talk to your teachers too. What are you seeing? How are things going on? But then we have to sort of somehow collect that data to understand that. So if you have case management, you have a threat assessment or behavior assessment or a way to have parents, students report that something is happening that concerns them, and then you have a way to investigate that. You have a way to say that's happening or it's not happening, or there's some variation of that, and you can keep track of that. You will soon learn what your culture is. And if you are receptive in receiving those reports and you are actively investigating them and you're responding to the parents who report that, hey, thanks for the report. We've looked into it. Everyone's been talked to. We believe we've nipped this in the bud. However, if you see further evidence that this is reoccurring, we need to know. That parent is much more likely to report a second incident, a third incident.
Yep.
And then you'll start to figure out where this is happening. Right? And, when parents are involved in the overall safety program, they're more likely to become involved in different aspects of it, if that makes sense. So have them participate in your safety program. When you have drills, let the parents know that you're going to be running a drill, and have the parents talk to especially the young kids, about the drills, what they learned, how they're supposed to respond. Have those conversations at home. Talk to your parents about having those conversations. And when you meet with your parents, most schools have parent-teacher night a couple times a year. Talk to your parents about it. Say, hey, are you talking to your kids about these behaviors? We're starting to see these behaviors. Have them talk to them about it, and let's see what we can do to really get a handle on it. And if nothing else, we get this shift, this paradigm shift in, I don't want to be a person who just stirs the pot, but I want to be a person who helps identify there's a problem and help be part of the solution to that. And right now, you can see a huge, very thick line between what the parents want and what the schools are doing. Because we've talked about this recently. There is a huge increase in the number of families who are choosing not to send their kids to public schools.
Yeah.
And whatever that means to you, whether it's homeschooling or private schools or changing the districts altogether, there's lots of things that are occurring that you can look at and you should be looking at as an indicator of how well we are doing as a school district. If you see a huge dump in your enrollment, it's not just because parents are moving out of the area or our community is aging up, right? So take a look at that and see if and how those are indicators that you might have a school issue. I mean, we see it all the time. And I'm surprised that this doesn't become more of an issue within the school districts. I moved from California to Virginia. I have a young family. I'm looking for a house. What is the first question I ask?
How are the schools?
That's right. And not only how are the schools, which school is the best school in the district, right? So we know that there are hierarchies within the school districts themselves. Even if overall the school district is thought of as being very highly thought of, then we know that there are different levels within the same school district. Oh, this is really a much better school. Why? What are they doing different than all the other schools are doing? How can we bring up the overarching thought of the school district so that all of the schools are well thought of? I remember just within California, they used to have an open transfer policy in my district where I was at. All you had to do was enroll at that school. They didn't care as long as you were within your district. They didn't care what school you went to. What do you think happened?
One school filled up.
Yep.
All the other schools got left in the dust.
Yeah, they were struggling.
Yeah.
Yep, they were struggling. And you have this one school, they were getting everything because they had a very involved parent group, very active community. And then you had these other schools where they couldn't. And I will tell you right now that not all of that was socioeconomic.
Right.
There were some very good schools in the lower socioeconomic areas that people gravitated towards and left the other ones like, what are you thinking? And it was all about the school culture and how hard they worked to create that positive school culture. And we have this conversation completely outside of the context of what we're talking about today, but it applies. Is when I went to the school districts as a safety coordinator, I never really understood how much of the center of that community those schools are. And if you have a positive school environment and a safe school, your neighborhoods tend to be safer.
Oh, yeah.
And again, not dependent on the socioeconomic status of the neighborhood. If those schools are performing better, your neighborhoods are performing better. And, this is all relational and interconnected. Get involved, because if something happens in that neighborhood, it impacts the culture of the school and what happens in the school. If you have something that happens in the school, it impacts the culture and the workings of your neighborhood, your community, both negatively and positively.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It doesn't matter what the location is. If the quarrels are the same between the individuals, then it's no matter where they are, they're going to feel the same way about each other.
Right. But it also works in the positive.
Right.
We often, especially in my line of work, we talk about the negative, but it's so much better if we affect it on the positive side, because that also affects everything. And it's not that much more difficult. Sustainability is a little bit more difficult because it only takes one little negative action to bring it down. But if you have a good, positive culture there, supportive, kids are valued, parents, families are valued, then it's very quick to recover if it's working correctly to begin with. And the reason I'm saying this is because this is where the parents are intimately involved in helping the schools create that culture.
And so there's a lot of weight both on the schools and the parents here. It's, outside of the school, it's really heavy on the parents to have that responsibility of looking out for those situations and things that are going on with their communities. And then within the school, it's pretty heavy responsibility on them that how their culture is in the school directly affects the communities outside of the school. So tells you how important school safety is.
Right. So it goes back to everything's interconnected, right? Everything is relational. Everyone has responsibility. It takes a village. We have all of these little sayings, right? But we still practice it in a silo. Oh, that happened at school. So as a parent, it happened at school. It's not my responsibility. As a school, that happened at home. It's not my responsibility. It's been so much of somebody else's responsibility that every state in the United States has a mandatory reporting law, right? If a teacher is aware of something that is negatively impacting a child, they're being neglected, they're being abused, however you define all of that stuff, there's issues, they are mandated to report that. That is nothing more than a legal attempt to say your responsibility as a school teacher, as a school administrator, extends beyond the school walls and fences. But that being said, parents also have an obligation to protect their child regardless of where they're at. So you can't just say, oh, that's a school incident, not my problem. It is, because your child's going to come home having been victimized, and now you're going to have to deal with what's happening, what's occurring at school. So it's important that we understand that how important the schools are to children's safety, not just school safety, children's safety, and how important the community is to children's safety, not just home safety or community safety, wherever they're at, whether they're at home or whether they're at school. And if we continue to work in these silos, which seems to be the crux of everything, is, oh, that's a school problem. It's not a school problem. It's a community problem that just happens to be occurring at school. Oh, that's a community problem. It's not just a community problem. It's a school problem that's occurring outside of the school. And we can go on and on about examples of where those two interconnect and interact with each other. And until we look at taking the responsibility for the whole child, the whole community, the whole family, the whole school, we're still going to continue to have these problems. School violence is not a school violence thing. It's a community violence thing. It just occurs at school.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.